The small town of Millfield, Nebraska, had always prided itself on being the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked at night. A quiet farming community of just under 5,000 residents, where the tallest structure was the grain silo that cast long shadows across Main Street on summer evenings. The kind of town where the local diner served the same breakfast special for 30 years, where high school football games were community events, and where the annual Harvest Festival drew visitors from 3 counties over. It was also the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, which made it all the more unsettling when, on the morning of October 17, 1992, the Harlow family simply vanished without a trace. The Harlows, Robert, age 42, his wife Elaine, 39, and their 12-year-old son, Timothy, had lived in their modest 2-story colonial on Sycamore Drive for nearly a decade. Robert worked as branch manager at Millfield Savings and Loan, while Elaine taught 4th grade at Millfield Elementary. They were, by all accounts, the quintessential all-American family, active in the community, regular attendees at the Methodist Church, and fixtures at Timothy's Little League games. They were just normal, recalled Thomas Grayson, who had been police chief in 1992 and was now well into his 80s, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he recounted the case that haunted his career. That's what made it so damn strange. The Harlows weren't the type to run off. They weren't having money problems, no drugs, no affairs that we could find. They were just a regular family who went to bed on a Friday night and wasn't there Saturday morning. The morning of October 17th began like any other Saturday in Millfield. The overnight temperature had dipped near freezing, leaving a thin layer of frost on windshields and browning lawns. Main Street bustled with weekend shoppers, and the local high school football team was preparing for their homecoming game against neighboring Riverton. Diane Miller, who lived directly across the street from the Harlows, was the first to notice something amiss. She had arranged to carpool with Elaine to a church fundraiser that morning. When Elaine failed to appear at the agreed-upon time of 9 a.m., Diane crossed the street and knocked on the door. After receiving no answer, she peered through windows and noticed the family car, a blue 1989 Ford Taurus, still parked in the driveway. I remember thinking it was odd that both cars were there, but nobody was answering. Diane told investigators years later, the Harlows were punctual people. If they needed to cancel, they would have called. What Diane didn't know, what nobody knew, was that she was standing at the threshold of one of the most baffling disappearances in Nebraska's history. By noon, concerned calls from Diane and other community members who had expected to see the Harlows that day prompted Officer Michael Lawson to conduct a welfare check at the residence. What he found, or rather what he didn't find, would become the cornerstone of a mystery that would span more than 3 decades. The house was intact, Officer Lawson noted in his initial report. No signs of forced entry or struggle. Breakfast dishes were washed and put away. The television in the living room was turned off, but still warm to the touch. 3 jackets were missing from the coat rack by the front door. Adult male, adult female, and child sizes. The family's second vehicle, a 1991 green Jeep Cherokee, was not on the premises. Most puzzling of all, the Harlow's beds were made, but when Officer Lawson pulled back the covers, he discovered they were still warm as if the family had just risen. The coffee pot in the kitchen contained half a pot of fresh coffee. The toaster held 2 slices of bread, slightly burned. A pot of oatmeal sat on the stove, the bottom layer scorched as if it had been left heating too long. It appeared the Harlows had been in the middle of their morning routine when something or someone interrupted them. Within hours, the Millfield Police Department launched a search. The Harlows' immediate neighbors were interviewed. Timothy's school friends and their parents were questioned. Robert's colleagues at the bank and Elaine's fellow teachers were contacted. No one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual that morning. By nightfall, the green Jeep Cherokee had been entered into the National Crime Information Center database. Roadblocks were established on the 2 highways leading out of Millfield. Search teams with dogs combed the woods that bordered the eastern edge of town. The small police department, unaccustomed to major investigations, requested assistance from the state police. "We had to consider every possibility," explained Deputy Sandra Walsh, one of the original investigators now retired. Had they fled voluntarily? Were they victims of a crime? Had there been a family tragedy? With no bodies, no ransom note, and no witnesses, we were starting from zero. The Harlow home quickly became the center of the investigation. Forensic techniques in 1992 were far less advanced than today, but investigators meticulously documented the scene. They noted several curious details. Robert's wallet was found in the master bedroom, containing $43 in cash and all of his credit cards. Elaine's purse sat on the kitchen counter, her driver's license and bank cards undisturbed inside. The family's passports were in a desk drawer in the study. Timothy's backpack hung on his bedpost, homework completed and tucked neatly inside. Nothing of obvious value appeared to be missing. The only personal items investigators could confirm were not in the home were the clothes the family might have been wearing and Robert's set of keys, which presumably included keys to the missing Jeep. 2 days into the investigation, attention turned to the Harlow's financial situation. Robert's position at the bank gave him access to substantial funds, raising the possibility of embezzlement as a motive for the family's sudden disappearance. However, a thorough audit of Millfield savings and loan revealed no irregularities. The Harlow's personal accounts showed a comfortable middle-class existence, mortgage payments up to date, modest credit card debt, and approximately seven. "We looked hard at the money angle," Deputy Walsh recalled. "It's often the simplest explanation. But the Harlows weren't flush with unexplained cash, nor were they drowning in debt. Their financial picture was exactly what you'd expect for a bank manager and a teacher with one child." The investigation expanded. Records showed no unusual phone calls to or from the Harlow residence in the weeks before their disappearance. Timothy's school reported no behavioral changes or concerning incidents. Neither Robert nor Elaine had filled prescriptions for any medications beyond Elaine's mild allergy pills. Their medical records revealed no serious health issues. Meanwhile, the disappearance of a seemingly ordinary family from a small Midwestern town captured national attention. The story appeared on the evening news across the country. The Harlows photographs Robert with his neatly trimmed beard and wire-rimmed glasses, Elaine with her warm smile and shoulder-length brown hair, Timothy with his gap-toothed grin and Little League uniform became familiar to millions of Americans. On October 23, 1 week after the disappearance, the first significant lead emerged. A gas station attendant in Grand Island, Nebraska, approximately 100 miles west of Millfield, reported seeing a green Jeep Cherokee matching the Harlow's vehicle during his shift on the morning of October 7. According to his statement, the vehicle had pulled up to a pump around 7:15 a.m., and a man fitting Robert Harlow's description had filled the tank, paid cash, and purchased 3 bottles of water and some snack foods. He seemed normal, the attendant told investigators. Not in a hurry, not nervous. He was wearing a dark jacket and baseball cap. Didn't say much, just asked for $20 of regular and paid with a $20 bill. Didn't ask for directions or anything else. The timing raised immediate questions. Grand Island was approximately a 2-hour drive from Millfield. If Robert Harlow had been seen at 7:15 a.m., the family would have had to leave their home around 5 a.m. hours before anyone noticed them missing. And while it was still dark, yet Diane Miller reported seeing both family vehicles in the driveway when she walked her dog at 6:30 a.m. that morning. When presented with a photo lineup, the gas station attendant identified Robert Harlow with about 70%. 2 days later, another potential sighting was reported. A waitress at a diner in North Platte, Nebraska, nearly 200 miles west of Millfield, claimed to have served breakfast to a family matching the Harlow's description around 9:30 a.m. on October 7. She recalled the family because the man had left a generous tip, and the boy had been reading a comic book about dinosaurs, which she remembered because her own son was interested in the same subject. They were polite, kept to themselves, she said. The mom looked tired. They all ordered the same thing, pancakes and scrambled eggs. They were there maybe 30 minutes, then left. Headed west, I think. Again, the timing created confusion. If the family had been in Grand Island at 7:15 a.m. and North Platte at 9:30 a.m., they would have had to drive directly between the two cities at roughly the legal speed limit. It was possible, but it left no time for detours or prolonged stops. When shown photographs, the waitress identified Elaine and Timothy with high confidence, but was less certain about Robert. The potential sightings shifted the investigation westward. The green Jeep Cherokee became the primary focus, with alerts sent to law enforcement agencies across Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, and South Dakota. On October 29, 12 days after the disappearance, the first truly jarring development occurred. The Harlow's Jeep Cherokee was found abandoned at a scenic overlook near Scottsbluff, Nebraska, approximately 350 miles west of Millfield and less than 20 miles from the Wyoming border. The vehicle was locked, its tank nearly empty. Inside, investigators found 3 empty water bottles, snack wrappers, and a dinosaur comic book on the back seat. Most disturbingly, a single hiking boot confirmed to belong to Robert Harlow was discovered about 50 yards from the vehicle at the beginning of a trail that led into the rugged terrain. Despite an extensive search involving helicopters, mounted units, and tracking dogs, no other trace of the Harlows was found in the area. The discovery of the abandoned vehicle transformed what had been a missing persons case into something potentially more sinister. The scenic overlook where the Jeep was found provided views of the North Platte River Valley, with steep cliffs dropping hundreds of feet to rocky terrain below. Investigators had to consider the possibility that the family had met with an accident, or worse, that they had gone to the overlook with the intention of ending their lives. "We searched those cliffs for days," said former State Patrol Officer Julian Bennett, who had been part of the search operation. "If they had fallen or jumped, we should have found something: bodies, clothing, additional footwear. But there was nothing. It was as if they had walked off the edge of the earth." Forensic examination of the Jeep provided few additional clues. The vehicle contained the Harlow's fingerprints, as expected, but no unidentified prints. There was no blood or other evidence of violence. The mileage on the odometer was consistent with a drive from Millfield to Scottsbluff. The GPS technology that would later become standard in missing persons cases was not available in 1992. Investigators had only witnessed sightings and physical evidence to reconstruct the family's movement. Back in Millfield, the investigation continued on multiple fronts. Detectives re-interviewed the Harlow's friends, extended family, and colleagues, searching for any detail that might have been overlooked. They examined Robert and Elaine's work records, looking for unusual patterns or incidents. They reviewed Timothy's school assignments and journals for any indication of family problems or plans. One peculiar detail emerged during this phase of the investigation. Several of Timothy's friends mentioned that in the weeks before the disappearance, he had become fixated on a series of local legends about the old Whitaker place, an abandoned farmhouse several miles outside of town that was rumored among children to be haunted. "Timothy kept talking about how he wanted to go out there at night," recalled one of his classmates. "He said his dad had promised to take him sometime, but his mom didn't like the idea. He was really into scary stuff back then: ghost stories, urban legends, that kind of thing." Investigators visited the abandoned Whitaker property and found no connection to the Harlows or evidence of recent visitors. Still, the detail added another layer of strangeness to an already baffling case. As weeks stretched into months, the investigation gradually lost momentum. The early 1990s lacked many of the technological tools that would later revolutionize missing persons cases. No widespread surveillance cameras, no cell phone records, no social media footprints. Investigators were left with traditional methods: interviews, physical evidence, and public appeals for information. By the one-year anniversary of the disappearance, the active investigation had been scaled back. The Harlow case remained open but was assigned to a single detective who balanced it with other responsibilities. Occasional tips still came in: a family resembling the Harlows spotted in Seattle, a man matching Robert's description working at a ski resort in Colorado, a boy who could have been Timothy enrolled in a school in Texas under a different name, but none led to concrete developments. For the residents of Millfield, the mystery left an indelible mark. The Harlow home stood empty, becoming an unofficial monument to the tragedy. Although the bank eventually foreclosed on the property, potential buyers were scarce. Nobody wanted to live in the house where that family disappeared. After several years, the property was purchased by a developer who intended to demolish the house and rebuild, but community pushback prevented the plan from proceeding. The house remained, gradually deteriorating, a physical reminder of unresolved questions. Robert's parents, Eleanor and William Harlow, both in their 70s when their son disappeared, became fixtures in Millfield, relocating from their home in Missouri to be closer to the investigation. They gave interviews, distributed flyers, and consulted psychics in their desperate search for answers. William passed away in 1998, having never learned what happened to his son and family. Eleanor, showing remarkable resilience, continued the search alone until her own death. Elaine had been an only child whose parents had died before her disappearance. With the passing of Robert's parents, there were no immediate family members left to advocate for the case. The Harlow file gathered dust in the Millfield Police Department's archives, occasionally reviewed when similar cases emerged or when new investigative techniques became available, but essentially dormant. By the early 2000s, the disappearance had transformed from current events to local legend. Parents in Millfield used the story to caution children about talking to strangers. Halloween dares involved approaching the abandoned Harlow house. Conspiracy theories flourished online, ranging from government witness protection to alien abduction. A small but dedicated community of amateur sleuths continued to discuss the case on internet forums, combing through publicly available information for overlooked clues. The most significant development came in 2007, 15 years after the disappearance, when advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to re-examine evidence from the Harlow home and vehicle. A hair found in the Jeep Cherokee, initially thought to belong to one of the family members, was determined through mitochondrial DNA analysis to have come from an unidentified male who was not related to the Harlows. This discovery briefly reinvigorated the investigation. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, but no matches were found. Investigators theorized that the hair could have come from someone who had been in the Jeep before the disappearance, a friend, a mechanic, a previous owner, or it could have belonged to someone involved in the family's disappearance. Without additional evidence, it was impossible to determine which scenario was correct. In 2012, the 20th anniversary of the disappearance, a documentary filmmaker named Jason Reynolds produced The Vanishing of Millfield, a feature-length examination of the case that aired on a cable network. Reynolds had grown up in a neighboring county and had been fascinated by the story since childhood. His documentary brought renewed attention to the mystery, introducing it to a new generation and providing a comprehensive overview of the known facts, prevailing theories, and unanswered questions. Reynolds' most valuable contribution was tracking down and interviewing people who had been on the periphery of the Harlows' lives. Former bank customers, parents of Timothy's classmates, distant relatives who had lost touch with the family before the disappearance. None provided case-breaking information, but collectively their recollections helped create a more nuanced portrait of the family. "They were nice folks, don't get me wrong," said Frank Donahue, who had worked as a teller under Robert at Millfield Savings and Loan. "But there was something, I don't know if private is the right word. They kept to themselves in certain ways. Robert never talked about his life before moving to Millfield. I worked with him for 7 years and I couldn't tell you where he went to college or what his first job was. When conversations went that way, he'd steer them back to work or sports or whatever." Similar observations came from Elaine's colleagues. She was warm with the children, a wonderful teacher, recalled Patricia Fleming, another teacher at Millfield Elementary. But she kept a certain distance from the staff, never came to happy hours, rarely shared personal stories in the break room. At the time, I just thought she was naturally reserved. Looking back, I wonder if there was more to it. These testimonials hinted at the possibility that the Harlows had secrets or perhaps were hiding from something or someone in their past. However, investigators had thoroughly examined their backgrounds during the original investigation and found nothing suspicious. Robert had grown up in St. Louis, graduated from the University of Missouri, and worked at banks in Missouri and Iowa before taking the position in Millfield. Elaine had been raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, attended Nebraska Wesleyan University, and taught in several schools around the state. Their histories, while not extraordinary, were well documented and verified. The 25th anniversary in 2017 passed with little official recognition. The case had been transferred multiple times as detectives retired or moved to different departments. The current holder of the file, Detective James Morales of the Nebraska State Police's Cold Case Unit, acknowledged that without new evidence or witnesses, the chances of resolving the case were slim. These types of long-term disappearances are among the most difficult cases in law enforcement. Detective Morales explained in a rare interview. Without bodies, without a crime scene, without clear evidence of criminal activity, we are severely limited in what we can do. We can't say with certainty that the Harlows were victims of foul play, that they chose to disappear, or that they met with a tragic accident. All we know is that a family vanished, leaving almost everything behind, and despite extensive searches and investigations, they were never found. For most residents of Millfield, the Harlow case had become a sad but distant memory, overtaken by newer tragedies and concerns. The town itself had changed. The bank where Robert worked had been acquired by a national chain. The elementary school where Elaine taught had been renovated and expanded. The diner where locals had gathered to discuss the latest developments in the case had closed, replaced by a fast food restaurant. A generation had grown up knowing the Harlows only as characters in a local mystery, and so the case might have remained an enduring enigma, occasionally referenced in articles about America's most baffling disappearances, but essentially cold if not for what happened on a rainy afternoon in April. On that day, a real estate developer named Eric Thompson arrived in Millfield with plans to revitalize the downtown area. His project included purchasing and restoring several historic buildings, including the long-abandoned Harlow property. Having researched the town's history, Thompson was aware of the house's dark reputation but viewed it as a business opportunity rather than a deterrent. These properties with stories attached to them, they can actually be quite valuable if marketed properly, Thompson later explained. I was thinking along the lines of a museum or even a themed bed and breakfast. People are fascinated by mysteries, by the macabre. I saw potential where others saw only tragedy. Thompson arranged to tour the Harlow house with a local real estate agent. The property had fallen into severe disrepair over the decades. Roof partially collapsed, windows broken, interior damaged by weather and wildlife. As Thompson and the agent navigated the debris-strewn rooms, Thompson became curious about the attached garage, which appeared to be in better condition than the house itself. The garage door was reinforced at some point, Thompson observed, newer than the rest of the house. Someone put money into securing it, even as they let the house itself deteriorate. When the agent admitted he didn't have keys to the garage, Thompson's curiosity only intensified. He returned to the property alone that evening, tools in hand, determined to see what lay behind the reinforced door. What he discovered would shock the community, reopen a 32-year-old investigation, and finally begin to unravel the mystery of what really happened to the Harlow family on that October morning in The reinforced garage door yielded to Thompson's efforts with unexpected ease. The padlock, though modern and sturdy, hadn't been properly secured. It hung through the latch, but wasn't actually locked. As Thompson slid the door upward, the hinges protested with a metallic groan that echoed through the empty neighborhood. The interior of the garage was pitch black, the air inside noticeably cooler and damp with decades of neglect. Thompson reached for his phone, activating the flashlight function. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a space that had been hermetically preserved, like a time capsule from 1992. Unlike the house which had succumbed to the elements, the garage appeared remarkably intact. The concrete floor was dusty but undamaged. Metal shelving units lined the walls, stacked with cardboard boxes labeled in neat handwriting. Christmas, camping, winter clothes. But it wasn't these ordinary items that caused Thompson to stumble backward, nearly dropping his phone. It was the green Jeep Cherokee parked in the center of the garage. "I knew immediately what I was looking at," Thompson later testified. Everyone in town knew that Jeep had been found abandoned in western Nebraska. But here it was, sitting in the garage, like it had never left. "I got out of there and called." Police responded within minutes. The first officers on the scene approached with caution, aware of both the historical significance and the potential danger. Inside the garage, their flashlight beams confirmed Thompson's report. The vehicle matched the description and license plate of the Harlow family's Jeep Cherokee, the same vehicle supposedly discovered at Scottsbluff National Monument. Detective Allison Harding, recently assigned to the cold case unit of the Nebraska State Police, arrived shortly after midnight. A meticulous investigator with a background in forensic science, Harding immediately secured the scene and requested specialized support. By dawn, the Harlow property had been transformed into a hive of activity. Crime scene technicians in white protective suits moved methodically between the garage and their vehicles. Yellow police tape encircled the property, keeping at bay the growing crowd of curious onlookers and hastily assembled news crews. The implications were staggering. If the Jeep was here, then the vehicle found in Scottsbluff had been a deliberate plant-identical model, falsified plates, carefully staged with items connected to the family. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to create the impression that the Harlows had traveled west, when in fact their vehicle had never left Millfield. "This changes everything," Detective Harding told her superior by phone as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the garage. "Every assumption we have made about this case for the past 32 years has been built on a foundation that just crumbled." The initial examination of the Jeep revealed several critical details. A layer of dust covered every surface, undisturbed for what appeared to be decades. The keys were in the ignition. The gas gauge showed nearly empty, consistent with the report from the Scottsbluff vehicle. In the back seat, forensic technicians found a child's jacket that family photographs confirmed belonged to Timothy Harlow. Most significantly, the driver's seat was positioned unusually far forward, suggesting the last person to drive the vehicle had been considerably shorter than Robert Harlow's 6-foot frame. Investigators noted that the seat positioning would have been comfortable for someone of Elaine's height. "The vehicle appears to have been deliberately parked and concealed here," noted the lead forensic technician in her preliminary report. The garage door was reinforced sometime after the family's disappearance, based on manufacturing dates on the hardware. Someone wanted to ensure this Jeep remained hidden. By mid-morning, news of the discovery had spread beyond Millfield. National media outlets dispatched reporters to the scene. Online forums dedicated to the case exploded with theories and speculation. Former investigators, including retired Deputy Sandra Walsh, offered cautious comments, emphasizing the need to wait for forensic results before drawing conclusions. While the garage and Jeep underwent exhaustive examination, Detective Harding launched a parallel investigation into the mystery of the Scottsbluff vehicle. How had someone obtained an identical Jeep, matched the license plates, and planted evidence inside? Records from 1992 showed that the vehicle identification number VN on the Scottsbluff Jeep had matched the Harlow's registration, suggesting either an extraordinary coincidence or, more likely, that someone had gone to great lengths to obtain vehicle documentation. "The level of planning involved is remarkable," Detective Harding observed. "This wasn't opportunistic. This was calculated, meticulous, and executed with patience and resources." As the investigation into the garage discovery intensified, forensic technicians made another startling find. Behind a stack of storage containers in the far corner of the garage, partially concealed by a tarp, they discovered a metal lockbox. Unlike the vehicle and other garage contents, the lockbox showed signs of more recent handling, less dust, faint fingerprint smudges on the surface. Inside was a collection of items that seemed intentionally preserved. A bundle of letters held together with a rubber band, a small leather-bound notebook, several photographs, and a microcassette tape. The photographs showed locations unfamiliar to the investigators' urban settings, apartment buildings, street scenes that were clearly not from Millfield or anywhere in Nebraska. On the back of one photo, written in blue ink, "Remember where we started." The notebook contained pages of handwritten notes, most in what handwriting analysts would later confirm was Robert Harlow's distinctive script. The entries were cryptic, often just dates and initials or brief phrases that meant nothing to investigators. Several pages contained what appeared to be coded messages, sequences of numbers and letters with no obvious pattern. The microcassette proved initially frustrating. When played on a hastily located tape player, the first several minutes contained only silence. Then at the 3:47 mark, a male voice tentatively identified as Robert Harlow spoke a single sentence. "If you are listening to this, then you know we didn't leave willingly." The tape returned to silence for another minute before a different voice, female and unfamiliar to investigators, said, "The boy was never supposed to be involved. That was not our agreement." The discovery of these items shifted the investigation in a new direction. What had appeared for decades to be a case of a family voluntarily disappearing or meeting with foul play from an unknown assailant now suggested something far more complex. The materials in the lockbox hinted at hidden aspects of the Harlows' lives, secrets predating their time in Millfield, and possibly a pre-existing threat that had finally caught up with them in October. Detective Harding ordered comprehensive background checks on Robert and Elaine Harlow, reaching further back and digging deeper than the original investigation had gone. She was particularly interested in the period before they arrived in Millfield, the mid-1980s referenced in the photograph. The results were revelatory. Robert Harlow's history prior to 1987 appeared: legitimate birth certificate, school records, university transcripts, employment history. But Elaine Harlow was a different story. Records showed she had indeed attended Nebraska Wesleyan University and taught at schools around the state, but investigators found concerning gaps and inconsistencies. Most notably, her Social Security number had only become active in 1987, despite her being born in Her earliest verified address was an apartment in Lincoln, Nebraska, in January 9. Before that, Elaine Harlow simply didn't exist in any official record. We are looking at the strong possibility that Elaine Harlow was an assumed identity, Detective Harding explained in a briefing to her team. If so, we need to determine who she was before 1987, why she changed her identity, and whether that past has any connection to the family's disappearance. The investigation now divided into two parallel tracks: the forensic examination of the newly discovered evidence and the deep dive into Elaine Harlow's true background. Progress on both fronts came slowly but steadily. The forensic team, employing technologies unavailable in 1992, made several key discoveries in the Jeep Cherokee. Luminol testing revealed traces of blood that had been carefully cleaned from the vehicle's cargo area. DNA analysis identified it as belonging to Robert Harlow. The amount of blood was significant, consistent with a serious injury, though not necessarily fatal. More ominously, a 9mm bullet was found lodged in the underside of the driver's seat. Ballistic experts determined it had been fired from inside the vehicle, penetrating the seat from above before becoming embedded in the metal frame below. The bullet's trajectory suggested it had been fired from the back seat toward the driver, a position that would have been occupied by Elaine if she had indeed been the last person to drive the vehicle. "We are now treating this as a homicide investigation," Detective Harding announced at a press conference in early May. 6 weeks after the garage discovery. Based on physical evidence, we believe at least one member of the Harlow family was harmed in or near their vehicle. We are pursuing multiple leads regarding potential suspects and motives. Meanwhile, the search for Elaine Harlow's true identity had yielded a promising lead. An investigator specializing in cold cases and missing persons recognized a pattern in the coded notebook entries that connected to a series of bank robberies between 1984 and 1986. A group known to law enforcement as the Midday Crew had executed 7 precisely planned heists across the Midwest, stealing approximately $3.7 million. The crew was notable for their disciplined approach, no shots fired in and out in under 4 minutes, and meticulous advanced planning that suggested insider knowledge of banking operations. The FBI had identified 4 suspects in the Midday Crew: Michael Donahue, the presumed leader, his brother James Donahue, Patricia Winters, believed to be Michael's girlfriend, and an unidentified 4th accomplice known only by the alias The Professor, who was thought to be the strategic planner. After a near capture following their final robbery in St. Louis, the crew had vanished. The case remained open, but active investigation had been minimal for decades. Facial recognition software, comparing Elaine Harlow's driver's license photo with images from FBI files, returned a startling result. Elaine Harlow was almost certainly Patricia Winters. The match is conclusive, confirmed FBI Special Agent Catherine Morrison, who joined the investigation at Detective Harding's request. Patricia Winters and Elaine Harlow are the same person. What we don't know is whether Robert Harlow was involved with the Midday Crew, or if he was unaware of his wife's criminal past. As this revelation circulated through law enforcement channels, an unexpected communication arrived at the Nebraska State Police headquarters. A letter, postmarked from a small town in Oregon, was addressed simply to Harlow Case Detective, Millfield, NE. Inside was a single page of typed text. I saw the news about the garage. I have been watching for something like this for 32 years. I have information about what happened to the Harlow family. I was there that morning. I didn't come forward then because I was afraid. I'm dying now and have nothing left to lose. Call the number below if you want the truth. The letter was signed Andrew Collins and included a phone number with an Oregon area code. Detective Harding contacted Collins immediately. The man who answered sounded elderly and frail, but lucid. He agreed to speak with investigators in person and provided his address in Astoria, Oregon. Harding and Special Agent Morrison flew out the next morning. Andrew Collins lived in a modest bungalow overlooking the Columbia River. At 83, he was thin and stooped, with roomy eyes that nonetheless retained a sharp intelligence. He invited the investigators into his living room, where oxygen tanks and medication bottles suggested serious health issues. Lung cancer, Collins explained, settling into a worn armchair. Stage 4. Doctors give me 2 months, maybe 3. That's why I'm finally talking. I have carried this for too long. Over the next 4 hours, Collins revealed a story that filled crucial gaps in the Harlow mystery, while raising new questions about the family's fate. In 1992, Collins had worked as a long-haul trucker. On the morning of October 17, he had been passing through Millfield, taking a shortcut to avoid highway construction. It was early, just getting light, Collins recalled. I was on that street, Sycamore, because the main road was closed for repaving. I saw a man and woman struggling with something near a green Jeep in a driveway. At first I thought they were loading camping gear or something. Then I realized they were moving a body. Collins described slowing his truck and watching as the couple, whom he didn't recognize at the time as Robert and Elaine Harlow, maneuvered what appeared to be an unconscious or deceased adult male into the Jeep's cargo area. A young boy stood nearby, visibly distressed. The woman saw me watching. She stared right at me, and there was something in her eyes, not panic, but this cold calculation. She said something to the man, and he looked up at me too. I drove on, told myself it wasn't my business. Maybe they were helping a drunk friend. You know, I didn't want to get involved. Collins continued his route, but couldn't shake the unsettling image. 2 days later, at a truck stop in Wyoming, he saw a newspaper with the Harlow's photos and story. He recognized them immediately as the couple he had seen. I knew I should come forward, but I was scared. I had a record, nothing violent, just some bad checks in my younger days. I was on probation and wasn't supposed to be taking that shortcut through residential areas with my rig. I was afraid of losing my job, my livelihood, so I kept quiet. As the years passed, Collins's guilt grew. He followed the case from afar, collecting newspaper clippings and, later, online articles. When the Jeep was discovered at Scottsbluff, he became convinced there was more to the story than authorities realized, but still he remained silent. "I'm not proud of it," Collins said, his breathing labored. "I have thought about that family every day for 32 years. I see that boy's face in my dreams." Detective Harding pressed for more details about what Collins had witnessed. Could he be certain the body being loaded into the Jeep was male? Did he see blood or weapons? Did the boy appear to be held against his will? The person they were moving was wearing dark clothes. Maybe a jacket, definitely a man, larger than the woman, but about the same size as the other man. I didn't see blood, but the way they were handling him, he wasn't conscious. The boy wasn't restrained, but he looked terrified. He was clutching something, might have been a toy or a book. Collins' testimony provided a crucial piece of the puzzle, but conflicted with some established facts. If Collins had seen the Harlows loading a body into their Jeep early on, October 17, how did the vehicle end up back in their garage? And who was the third adult, the apparent victim in this scenario? The answers began to emerge the following week when forensic technicians made another discovery in the Harlow garage. Using ground-penetrating radar to examine the concrete floor, they detected an anomaly in the far corner, an area approximately 6 feet by 3 feet, where the concrete was slightly newer than the surrounding floor. With the necessary warrants secured, investigators began carefully breaking through the concrete. Beneath it, they found disturbed soil and approximately 4 feet down, human remains. The body, wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting, had been preserved enough for preliminary identification. An adult male, estimated to be in his early 40s at time of death. Cause of death appeared to be a gunshot wound to the head. Initial examination suggested the remains had been in place since the early 1990s. Dental records would later confirm what investigators already suspected. The body belonged to Robert Harlow. This case just shifted again. Detective Harding told her team as they processed the grim discovery. If Robert Harlow is buried in the garage, then who was the man Collins saw with Elaine that morning? Who drove the Harlow Jeep to Scottsbluff and abandoned it? And most importantly, what happened to Elaine and Timothy? The investigation accelerated as additional resources poured in. The FBI officially joined the case, given the connection to the unsolved bank robberies. Agents interviewed former bank employees who had worked with Robert, seeking any indication that he might have known about Elaine's criminal past or been involved himself. These interviews yielded a surprising connection. Frank Donahue, the former teller who had been interviewed for the documentary film years earlier, shared a last name with 2 of the midday crew suspects. When confronted with this coincidence, Donahue initially denied any relation but eventually admitted that Michael Donahue was his cousin. "I swear I didn't know Patricia Winters and Elaine Harlow were the same person," Donahue insisted. Michael disappeared in '86. None of the family heard from him after that. When Robert and Elaine came to town in '87, I had no idea there was any connection. Investigators were skeptical. The coincidence seemed too great that Elaine Harlow, formerly Patricia Winters, would end up working in the same small-town bank as the cousin of her former criminal associate. Donahue was placed under surveillance while his claims were investigated. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of the bullet found in the Jeep provided another breakthrough. The 9mm round matched a weapon used in the midday crew's final robbery, a Beretta that had never been recovered. This suggested that someone connected to the original crew had been present during the events of October. As these pieces came together, investigators developed a working theory. Patricia Winters, Elaine, had assumed a new identity after the midday crew disbanded, possibly betraying her former associates in the process. She had established a seemingly normal life with Robert Harlow, who may or may not have known about her past. In October 1992, someone from her criminal past, likely Michael Donahue or the mysterious professor, had tracked her down in Millfield. The confrontation had turned violent, resulting in Robert's death. Elaine and this individual had attempted to dispose of the body, but were spotted by the passing trucker. They had then altered their plans, burying Robert in the garage and staging the elaborate false trail leading to Scottsbluff. But this theory had significant holes. It didn't explain Timothy's disappearance, or Andrew Collins' observation that the boy was present during the body moving. It didn't account for the apparent evidence that Elaine herself had been driving the Jeep shortly before it was hidden in the garage. And it didn't explain why someone would go to such lengths to conceal the vehicle rather than simply disposing of it. Another piece of the puzzle emerged when investigators analyzed the bundle of letters found in the lockbox. Written between 1986 and 1992, they were correspondence between presumably Elaine, and someone identified only as Professor. The contents suggested a complex relationship, part romantic, part conspiratorial. The most recent letter, dated October 1, 1992, just 2 weeks before the disappearance, contained a passage that chilled investigators. The contingency plan is in place. If Donahue makes contact, proceed immediately. The Chicago location is secured. Bring only essentials. Destroy this letter. Detective Harding connected this to a detail from the original investigation that had seemed minor at the time. In September 1992, Elaine had taken Timothy to Chicago for what she described to neighbors as a college visit for her nephew. School records showed Timothy absent for 3 days. Could this trip have been to prepare a safe house for a planned escape? The investigation now focused on Chicago, specifically attempting to trace Elaine and Timothy's movements during that September trip. Hotel records from 1992 were long gone, but investigators located credit card statements showing Elaine had rented a car and made purchases at several stores in Chicago's northern suburbs. Special Agent Morrison led a team that canvassed these areas with photos of Elaine and Timothy, seeking anyone who might remember them. At a real estate office in Evanston, they struck gold. The office manager, reviewing old files at the agent's request, found a rental agreement for a small house signed by Elizabeth Harris in September. The attached application included a photocopy of a driver's license that, while showing a different name, unmistakably featured Elaine Harlow's photograph. The house itself had been demolished years earlier to make way for a condominium development. However, property records showed it had been paid for in cash through a corporation called Midday Properties, LLC, a name that explicitly connected to the bank robbery crew. The rental agreement was for 6 months, with an option to extend. As these discoveries accumulated, Frank Donahue suddenly disappeared from Millfield. The FBI agents surveilling him reported that he had received a phone call, after which he hurriedly packed a bag and drove away from his home. Agents followed him to Omaha International Airport, where he purchased a ticket to Portland, Oregon. Given the connection to Andrew Collins' location in Astoria, Oregon, authorities decided to arrest Donahue before he could board his flight. Under interrogation, Donahue finally revealed what he knew. Yes, he had recognized Patricia Winters when she arrived in Millfield as Elaine Harlow. He had kept her secret in exchange for a share of the robbery money, which she had been slowly transferring to him over the years. When Robert discovered Elaine's true identity and the arrangement with Donahue in October 1992, he had threatened to go to the authorities. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," Donahue claimed, his voice shaking. "Michael came to town to talk sense into her. He just wanted his fair share, and then he'd disappear again. But Robert pulled a gun. I don't know where he got it. There was a struggle, and Michael shot him. It was self-defense, really. According to Donahue, Michael had helped Elaine dispose of Robert's body and create the false trail with the planted jeep in Scottsbluff. Timothy had witnessed everything. Rather than harm the boy, Michael and Elaine had taken him with them to the safe house in Chicago. The plan was to lay low for a few months, then head to Costa Rica, Donahue explained. Michael had connections there, property set up. They would live as a family, Michael, Patricia, and the boy. When asked why Elaine would agree to this arrangement after Michael had killed her husband, Donahue's answer was simple. Because she was never really Elaine Harlow. She was always Patricia Winters. The quiet life in Millfield was just a cover. She and Michael had been planning to reunite for years. Robert was the odd man out. Donahue claimed he hadn't heard from either of them since 1992. His recent flight to Oregon had been prompted by seeing Andrew Collins' name in a news report about the case. Collins, Donahue revealed, was not a random trucker who had witnessed the body being moved. He was the professor, the strategic mastermind of the midday crew, who had been living under an assumed identity just as Patricia Elaine had. Armed with this information, Detective Harding and Special Agent Morrison rushed back to Oregon, only to find they were too late. Andrew Collins had passed away the previous evening. A search of his home revealed a hidden safe containing over $800,000 in cash, multiple fake IDs, and a journal detailing the planning and execution of the midday crew robberies. Most significantly, the safe contained a sealed envelope addressed to the authorities. Inside was a handwritten confession and a series of coordinates. The confession largely corroborated Frank Donahue's account, but added critical details about what had happened after October. According to Collins, the plan to escape to Costa Rica had fallen apart when Michael Donahue suffered a fatal heart attack in January 1993, just months after the events in Millfield. Patricia, Elaine, now alone with Timothy, had contacted Collins for help. Collins had provided new identities for both and helped them relocate to a remote area of the Pacific Northwest. The coordinates in the envelope led investigators to a small cabin on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state. By the time they arrived, the cabin had been recently abandoned, dirty dishes in the sink, closets emptied in haste, a car missing from the garage. Neighbors reported that the woman and younger man who lived there, known locally as Catherine and David Wilson, had left suddenly 2 days earlier, shortly after news reports about developments in the Harlow case had aired nationally. A search of the cabin revealed decades of a life carefully constructed. School records for David Wilson showed he had been homeschooled until age 16, then attended community college. Photos on the walls showed him growing from a boy into a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Timothy Harlow. Other photos showed an older woman with dyed hair and altered appearance, who forensic analysts confirmed was Patricia Winters' Elaine Harlow, now in her 70s. Local sources reported that Catherine Wilson had worked remotely as a bookkeeper, while David operated a small boat tour business in a nearby harbor. They were described as private but friendly, occasionally attending community events but rarely inviting people to their home. No one suspected they were living under assumed identities or hiding from a decades-old crime. The cabin also contained a hidden room, accessible through a false wall in the main bedroom closet. Inside, investigators found the missing pieces of the puzzle. The actual 9mm Beretta used in both the bank robberies and Robert Harlow's murder, with Michael Donahue's fingerprints still identifiable on the grip. $1.2 million in cash, and a journal kept by Patricia Elaine detailing her double life. The final entry in the journal, dated just 3 days earlier, read, "Andrew called. They found the garage. After all these years, we have to run again. David doesn't understand. He still thinks his father died in an accident. How do I tell him now? How do I explain that everything he knows about himself is a lie?" As the search for Catherine and David Wilson, or rather Patricia Winters and Timothy Harlow, expanded to include international law enforcement, Detective Harding held a press conference summarizing what was now known about the case. She explained how the midday crew had fractured after their final robbery, with Patricia Winters taking a significant portion of the money and disappearing. She detailed how Patricia had created the Elaine Harlow identity and established a seemingly normal life in Millfield, either falling in love with Robert Harlow genuinely or selecting him as convenient cover. The events of October 17, 1992 were now clear. Michael Donahue had tracked down his former girlfriend and accomplice, confronted her and Robert, and in the ensuing conflict, Robert was killed. Patricia, Elaine, Michael, and Andrew Collins, the professor, had conspired to hide the body and create an elaborate misdirection, suggesting the family had traveled west before disappearing. They had taken Timothy with them, raising him under a false identity, likely telling him his father had died accidentally or abandoned them. This case represents one of the most complex and lengthy deceptions in criminal history, Detective Harding concluded. A woman who spent decades living multiple lies, a child who grew up not knowing his true identity, and a murder concealed by an elaborate fiction of a missing family. We are now focused on locating Patricia Winters and Timothy Harlow, bringing them in safely, and finally achieving justice for Robert Harlow. The press conference had barely concluded when Detective Harding was called away by an urgent message. A man identifying himself as David Wilson had contacted police headquarters, asking to speak with the lead investigator on the Harlow case. He claimed to have no knowledge of the crimes his mother had committed and wanted to cooperate with authorities. According to David Timothy, his mother had suffered a stroke shortly after their hasty departure from the cabin. He had taken her to a hospital in Vancouver, British Columbia, where she remained in critical condition. He had learned the truth about his identity and his family's history only after seeing news reports about the case and confronting his mother before her stroke. "I grew up believing my father had died in an accident when I was young," he told Detective Harding over the phone, his voice steady despite the evident emotion behind it. "I had no idea my entire life was built on a lie. I want to know the truth about my father. I want to come home." As Canadian authorities confirmed Catherine Wilson's hospitalization and placed her under guard, arrangements were made for Timothy Harlow, now a man of 44, to return to Millfield. The circle that had begun in October 1992 was finally closed, but the most poignant chapter of the story was yet to unfold. The homecoming of a boy who had vanished into the machinery of an elaborate criminal conspiracy, and the reckoning that awaited the woman who had orchestrated one of the most baffling disappearances in American history. The return of Timothy Harlow to Millfield was orchestrated with careful precision. After 3 decades of living as David Wilson, the psychological impact of reclaiming his birth identity required delicate handling. FBI psychologists worked closely with him in the days leading up to his arrival, preparing him for the emotional weight of confronting a past that had been deliberately hidden from him. On a crisp morning in June 2024, a dark government SUV with tinted windows turned onto Sycamore Drive. Detective Allison Harding sat beside Timothy in the back seat, watching his face as he took in the neighborhood where he had spent the first 12 years of his life. At 44, Timothy bore a striking resemblance to his father, the same square jaw and thoughtful eyes, though decades of Pacific Northwest living had weathered his skin differently than Nebraska might have. "Anything familiar?" Harding asked gently. Timothy shook his head slowly. "Fragments, maybe. Like trying to remember a dream." He pointed toward a large oak tree in what had been his neighbor's yard. "That tree was smaller. I think I used to climb it with another boy." As the vehicle pulled to a stop across from the Harlow house, a small crowd of reporters and curious onlookers had already gathered. Despite efforts to keep the visit private, news of Timothy's return had leaked, becoming the culmination of a story that had captured national attention for weeks. Detective Harding had arranged for a police cordon to keep people at a respectful distance, but the whispers and camera clicks were audible as Timothy stepped from the vehicle. He stood for a long moment, staring at the house where his family's ordinary life had shattered in a single violent morning. The structure had been stabilized after the forensic work was completed, but years of neglect had left it a shell of what it once was. Yellow police tape still cordoned off the garage where his father's remains had been found. "I have been dreaming about this place," Timothy said quietly, his voice carrying to Harding but no further. "Not remembering actually dreaming. Since I learned who I really am. In the dreams I'm walking through the rooms looking for someone, but I can never find them." The emotional complexity of Timothy's situation was unprecedented in forensic psychology. He was simultaneously a kidnapping victim, a witness to his father's murder, and a man whose entire identity had been constructed around carefully cultivated lies. He had grown up believing Catherine Wilson was his biological mother, and that his father had died in a car accident when he was young. The truth that he had been raised by his father's killer was a psychological burden few could comprehend. "For 32 years I have been someone else," Timothy had explained during his initial interview with FBI psychologists. "I have had a whole life school, relationships, a business. I have memories and experiences as David Wilson. And now I'm supposed to be Timothy Harlow again. But who is he? He's a 12-year-old boy who vanished. I'm a 44-year-old man." Timothy requested to enter the house alone, a wish Detective Harding granted with reluctance. "We will be right outside," she assured him. "Take all the time you need." For 47 minutes, Timothy wandered through the decaying rooms of his childhood home. He later described the experience as archaeological, excavating fragments of memory from beneath years of psychological burial. In his old bedroom, faded sports pennants still clung to one wall. The closet where he had kept his baseball gear remained half open, empty now, but triggering a sudden, vivid recollection of the glove his father had given him for his 10th birthday. In the kitchen, he stood where the breakfast table had once been, remembering with unexpected clarity the morning routine, his mother at the stove making oatmeal, his father reading the newspaper while drinking coffee. Ordinary moments that had become extraordinary in their absence. "I remember the night before it happened," Timothy told Detective Harding afterward, his voice steady but distant. "Dad came home late. He and Mom argued in their bedroom. I could hear them through the wall, but not what they were saying. Just the tones, Dad sounding confused, then angry, Mom's voice staying calm, almost rehearsed. I fell asleep before it ended." This new detail aligned with what investigators had pieced together. Robert Harlow had likely discovered something about his wife's true identity that evening, perhaps. Finding the correspondence with the professor, or recognizing Frank Donahue's connection to the midday crew. "And the morning it happened," Harding prompted gently. Timothy's expression tightened. "Still fragmented. A man I didn't know in our kitchen. Mom telling me to go back to my room, but I didn't. Dad shouting. Then the sound I didn't know it was a gunshot then. I'd never heard one outside of TV." He paused, struggling with the next memory. Mom grabbing my arm, very hard. The man Michael, I guess, telling her, "We need to move fast." Dad on the floor, blood. They made me help them carry him to the jeep. I remember thinking he would wake up, that he was just hurt. These recollections provided the final confirmation of what had actually transpired on October 17. Timothy had not only witnessed the killing, but had been forced to assist in the attempted disposal of his father's body, a traumatic event his young mind had partially suppressed, and that his mother had spent decades reinforcing with carefully constructed alternative narratives. While Timothy confronted his past in Millfield, Patricia Winters, the woman he had known his entire life as first Elaine Harlow, and then Catherine Wilson, fought for her life in a Vancouver hospital. The stroke she had suffered was severe, leaving her partially paralyzed and unable to speak coherently. Canadian authorities maintained a constant guard on her room, while diplomatic arrangements were made for her eventual extradition to face murder charges in the United States. Timothy initially refused to visit her, the betrayal still too raw. "I spent my whole life believing her lies," he explained to Harding. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every moment of my childhood after we left here, it was all built on my father's murder." How do you face the person who did that to you? Who stole your real life and replaced it with a fiction? The investigation continued to expand as Timothy provided new details about his life after Millfield. According to his account, the journey had begun with several months in Chicago, where Patricia, Elaine, and Michael Donahue had lived as a couple while planning their next move. After Michael's unexpected death from a heart attack in early 1993, Patricia had contacted Andrew Collins, the professor, for help. Collins had provided new identities, Catherine and David Wilson, along with a comprehensive background story. They were a mother and son, relocating after the death of David's father. He had arranged for them to settle initially in northern Idaho, in a small community where questions were few and privacy was respected. They had lived there for nearly a decade before moving to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. She homeschooled me until I was 16, Timothy explained. Looking back, I can see she was afraid to have me in a public school, where I might say something that contradicted our cover story. She controlled everything: who I talked to, what I knew about our past, how I understood the world. It was only when I started community college that I began to have any real independence. Throughout these years, Patricia had maintained the story that Timothy's father had been killed in a car accident before he was old enough to remember clearly. She presented herself as a widow who had moved to give them both a fresh start. The relocation to Washington had been explained as a desire to be closer to the ocean, which she claimed had been a lifelong dream. She created these elaborate details about my father, how they met, what he was like, little habits and sayings she attributed to him. Timothy recalled. She had photographs she'd show me. Now I realized they were probably staged with Michael Donahue, with his face carefully kept out of frame or blurred. She built this whole mythology about a man who never existed, while my real father was buried in a garage back in Nebraska. As Timothy spoke with investigators, he also began to recognize patterns that had seemed innocent at the time, but now revealed Patricia's ongoing paranoia. Their homes had always featured multiple exit routes and emergency supplies. She had taught him to be wary of photographers and to avoid social media, even as it became ubiquitous. Every few years, they would practice what she called bug-out drills, exercises in quickly packing essentials and disappearing. She had this metal box, Timothy remembered, locked, always within reach. Once, when I was about 17, I asked what was in it. She told me it contained insurance, that if anything ever happened to her, I should take the box and call a number written on the inside lid. I think that must have been Colin's number. Back in Millfield, the community struggled to process the resolution of a mystery that had defined the town for generations. For older residents who remembered the Harlows, Timothy's return represented a bittersweet closure. For younger residents who had grown up with the story as local legend, the concrete reality of Timothy Harlow walking the same streets their parents had described in bedtime warnings was surreal. Diane Miller, now in her 80s, was among those who requested to meet with Timothy. The woman who had first noticed the Harlow's absence had never left Millfield, living in the same house across from their empty property for all these years. I used to see you riding your bike, she told Timothy when they met at the local diner, her hands trembling with age and emotion. Every day after school around the block, 3 times before your mother called you in for dinner. You were such a good boy. We all wondered what happened to you. Some people thought you were all dead. Some thought you'd been taken into witness protection. No one imagined. She couldn't complete the sentence. No one had imagined the truth, that Elaine Harlow had been a bank robber living under an assumed identity, that she had been complicit in her husband's murder, that she had stolen not only Robert's life but Timothy's truth. Timothy's former classmates, now middle-aged with children of their own, approached him cautiously. Many remembered him from Little League or birthday parties or classroom projects. Several brought photographs or school yearbooks, tangible evidence of the life that had been taken from him. "This is you and me," said one man, pointing to a yellowed photograph of 2 boys standing beside a science fair project. "We made a volcano. You figured out how to make the lava look real with red food coloring and dish soap. You were always good at that kind of thing. Timothy studied the photo with an expression that mingled recognition with alienation. I remember the volcano, he admitted, but it feels like something that happened to someone else. Like I'm looking at my own ghost. The psychological evaluation of Timothy continued throughout this period. Specialists noted his remarkable resilience, but expressed concern about his compartmentalization of trauma. He spoke about the events with a detachment that suggested incomplete processing. When discussing his father's murder, he often referred to Timothy in the third person, as though creating distance between his current self and the boy who had witnessed horror. He's developed sophisticated coping mechanisms, observed Dr. Eleanor Bennett, the lead psychologist assigned to the case. For 32 years, he's lived a double life without realizing it. On the surface was David Wilson, boat tour operator, community member, son of Catherine. Buried beneath was Timothy Harlow, witness to murder, kidnapping victim, child separated from his true identity. Now those two selves are in conflict, and integration will take time. The legal proceedings advanced on multiple fronts. Frank Donahue faced charges as an accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. The estate of Andrew Collins was the subject of multiple investigations, with authorities tracing the movement of the stolen bank robbery money across decades. And Patricia Winters, once she was medically stable enough for transport, would face the most serious charges: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and numerous financial crimes. 2 months after his return to Millfield, Timothy made a decision that surprised investigators. He asked to visit Patricia in the secure medical facility where she was now housed in Nebraska, awaiting trial. Her condition had improved marginally. She could communicate through writing and simple phrases, but doctors confirmed she would likely never fully recover. I need to hear it from her, Timothy explained to Detective Harding. Not for the case. You have everything you need for that. I need to hear her admit what she did. I need to know if any of it was real, if she ever actually loved me, or if I was just part of her cover. The meeting took place under careful supervision. Patricia Winters, now 71 and physically diminished by her stroke, sat in a wheelchair across from the son she had raised under false pretenses. For several minutes, neither spoke. Timothy studied the woman he had known as his mother, seeing her now through the lens of terrible knowledge. Why? He finally asked, the single word carrying the weight of a lifetime of deception. Patricia's right hand trembled as she laboriously wrote on a notepad. Her handwriting, once neat, had become childlike and uncertain. The message was simple: to protect you. Timothy's calm demeanor cracked slightly. Protect me? You killed my father. You stole my life. You lied to me every day for 32 years. More laborious writing. Michael shot Robert. Not me. Not planned. According to statements Patricia provided through her limited communication, the confrontation with Robert had indeed escalated beyond what she and Michael had anticipated. Robert had discovered her true identity and her ongoing communication with Collins. He had threatened to go to the authorities, not only about her past, but about Frank Donahue's involvement. Robert Gunn, she wrote, attempting to convey that her husband had drawn a weapon first. Timothy struggled to maintain his composure. Even if that's true, everything after was your choice. You chose to bury him in our garage. You chose to take me away. You chose to make me believe my entire life was something it wasn't. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. She wrote, loved you always. Real. Whether Timothy believed this final claim remained unclear. He left the meeting after less than 30 minutes, visibly shaken but somehow more settled. I don't forgive her, he told Harding afterward. I don't know if I ever will, but I needed to see her as she is now. Not the mother I thought I had, not the criminal mastermind from your case files, just a broken person who made terrible choices. As summer faded into fall, the legal proceedings against Patricia Winters concluded with unexpected swiftness. Given her medical condition and the comprehensive evidence against her, Prosecutors agreed to a plea arrangement. She would provide complete details of the midday cruise activities, including previously unsolved crimes, in exchange for a sentence that would allow her to remain in a medical facility rather than prison. For Timothy, the resolution of the criminal case marked the beginning rather than the end of his journey. Having spent his adult life as David Wilson, he faced practical as well as psychological challenges in reclaiming his birth identity. His boat tour business in Washington remained in limbo. His friendships and relationships there had been built on a foundation that had suddenly shifted. Even his educational and professional credentials were associated with a name that was not legally his. "I'm not going back to being David," he explained during a final interview with Detective Harding before leaving Millfield. "That person was a construction, but I'm not the Timothy who disappeared either. I need to find out who I am now, with the truth as my starting point." He had decided to sell the Harlow property, donating a portion of the proceeds to a foundation supporting children who had been separated from their families through abduction or deception. The remainder would fund his fresh start location, undecided, future open. "I might go east," he said. "I have spent my whole life looking at the Pacific. Maybe it's time to see the Atlantic." The town of Millfield began its own healing process. The Harlow house, that long-standing monument to mystery, was finally demolished after Timothy's departure. In its place, the town council approved the creation of a small park with a simple memorial plaque, honoring Robert Harlow and acknowledging the community's enduring connection to the case. For Detective Allison Harding, the Harlow investigation represented the most significant achievement of her career. A cold case resolved through methodical investigation, technological advances, and simple persistence. Yet even she acknowledged that some questions might never be fully answered. "We know the what, the how, and most of the why," she reflected in her final case report. "But there are emotional and psychological dimensions to this case that defy simple documentation. How does a woman like Patricia Winters compartmentalize her life so completely? How does a child like Timothy Harlow grow up with an emotional time bomb planted in his subconscious? How does a town absorb and process a tragedy that spans generations?" The case attracted academic attention, with criminologists, psychologists, and sociologists studying various aspects of the three-decade deception. Patricia Winters became the subject of multiple psychological profiles. Her ability to maintain dual identities and manipulate those around her categorized as an extreme manifestation of psychopathic traits, combined with exceptional intelligence and planning abilities. Timothy's experience generated new research in the field of trauma and memory, particularly regarding children who witness violence and subsequently experience identity disruption. His unusual position, having lived a largely normal and successful life despite the buried trauma and false narrative, challenged existing models of post-traumatic development. For the public, the Harlow case represented a particularly unsettling category of true crime, one where the most mundane details of ordinary life could conceal extraordinary deceptions. The image of the quintessential American family harboring such secrets resonated deeply in the national consciousness, spawning documentaries, books, and countless discussions about the nature of identity and truth. 6 months after Timothy's departure from Millfield, Patricia Winters died in the medical facility where she was serving her sentence. The official cause was listed as complications from her stroke, though some speculated that her declining health had been accelerated by the collapse of the identity she had maintained for so long. Timothy, informed of her death by Detective Harding, responded with a brief message. "I'm still sorting out who she was to me. Mother, kidnapper, protector, destroyer. Maybe she was all of those things. I hope she finds peace, even if I'm still searching for mine." On the 1-year anniversary of the garage discovery, a package arrived at the Nebraska State Police headquarters, addressed to Detective Harding. Inside was a letter from Timothy and a photograph showing him standing on an Atlantic beach at sunrise. His message was simple but profound. "I have been thinking about identity, how it's both fragile and resilient. Patricia spent decades constructing elaborate fictions, yet the truth remained buried in that garage, waiting to be found. I spent my life believing I was someone else, yet here I am, still myself in some essential way. I have decided to use both names now. Timothy David Harlow Wilson. It's unwieldy on forms, but it acknowledges both parts of my journey. The boy from Millfield and the man who grew up by the Pacific. The son of Robert Harlow and the person I became despite everything that was taken from me. The therapist I'm working with uses the term post-traumatic growth, the idea that people can emerge from terrible experiences, not just damaged, but transformed in ways that eventually lead to deeper understanding. I'm not there yet, but I see the possibility ahead. Yesterday I met someone who asked about my unusual name. For the first time I told my story without feeling like I was talking about someone else. Small steps toward integration, I suppose. I'm enclosing the last photograph I have of my father. It was in that lockbox all along, hidden among Patricia's papers. I thought you might include it in the case file so he's remembered as more than a victim. He was a man who made breakfast for his son and taught him to throw a baseball. Whatever else Patricia took from me, I still have that. The photograph showed Robert Harlow, sitting on the front steps of the house on Sycamore Drive, smiling directly at the camera, one arm around a young Timothy. They were dressed for fishing poles, leaning against the railing beside them, matching caps shading their eyes, a moment of ordinary joy, preserved across decades of extraordinary deception. Detective Harding added the photograph to the file and closed the folder on the Harlow case, officially resolved, but emotionally resonant, a mystery answered, but not diminished by its solution. Like Timothy himself, the story existed in dual states, conclusion reached, but echoes continuing, truth revealed but implications still unfolding, an ending that was also, inevitably, a new beginning. In Millfield, the small park where the Harlow house once stood became a quiet space of reflection. The plaque commemorating the family drew occasional visitors, true crime enthusiasts, journalists working on retrospectives, former neighbors paying respects. Most simply read the inscription, stood silently for a moment and moved on, carrying with them the uneasy knowledge that even the most seemingly ordinary lives might conceal extraordinary secrets, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to light. The town itself had been irrevocably marked by the events no longer defined by a mystery, but now by its resolution. Residents gradually stopped referring to the Harlow disappearance and began instead to speak of the Harlow return, focusing on Timothy's resilience rather than the tragedy that had preceded it. The shift was subtle but significant, a community choosing to emphasize healing over harm, recovery over loss, the possibility of rebuilding even after the most profound destruction. And somewhere on the Atlantic coast, Timothy David Harlow Wilson continued the painstaking work of reconciling his fractured past with his present reality, constructing an identity that could accommodate both the 12-year-old boy from Nebraska and the 44-year-old man who had lived an entire life under a different name. He had lost 3 decades to an elaborate deception, but the future remained unwritten, a blank page awaiting his authorship, a story still in progress, a truth still emerging from the shadows of an extraordinary lie.